What's happening, responsible day traders? We're here for another episode of What's the Market Doing this week. So today is Sunday, August 14th, 2022. I'm Lindsay Duff, and this is Responsible Day Trading. Last week was full of surprises. We saw that market just continue to shoot up. Now, we had a pretty good idea that that was going to happen because we still had a lot of strength going to the upside with the daily chart on the Emini S&P. Now, it has reached that next area. Man, it just shot right up there. But we are at some very extreme areas on our daily chart, which says this may just be a pullback to a bigger push to the downside. So we're going to have to look at it. We're going to see what it says. We're going to see if it's still got some steam to go up or if we're anticipating this to kind of slow down and start moving back to the downside. At the very least, there's always going to be pullbacks, even on the micro level, and there's going to be pullbacks on this just like grand scale. So we're learning to kind of see all of those together and piece it together in order to understand what to expect as the bigger moves for the day and what to expect just in general. I mean, in the long run, if I'm looking at a 233, if I'm looking at a daily chart, it is the same market. I mean, the idea, if I'm looking at the ES on all of them, I'm looking at the same market. Even if I'm looking at the micro ES, we're looking at the same market, which means that the same things happen. They're just on a bigger scale or on a tiny scale. And what you really put your focus on is where you're going to see the trade setups happening. My suggestion is to have like a middle grade trade chart, have a larger chart to watch the bigger, more anticipated direction and to be able to hold on for the bigger move, and watch that tiny chart to be able to minimize your risk, to be able to have clear thinking as, hey, have we actually slowed down yet to get into this trade? I can't tell you how many traders I see really anticipate the direction correctly. It's the execution that gets them. And so they'll get in early, and then they're like, oh man, I don't know what I'm doing. And then it takes off without them because they're too scared to take the proper move after that time. We work a lot on how to understand when the proper move is setting up and just being prepared for when that happens, okay? So that's what it's all about. And speaking of being prepared, let's go ahead and prepare ourselves for this week by checking out what the news has to say. Okay, guys, so let's head on over to responsibledaytrading.com. We're going to go to market news, and here we're going to see what we got going on here, okay? Last week we didn't have a lot of news and I was like, oh, it's going to be slow maybe then. No, but that sucker just shot up to the upside. So, and we'll really look into that, how it did that, or what happened during that time. And you can see we've got nothing on Monday. Tuesday, we've got pre-market. Wednesday, we've got some pre-market. We've got some news that will happen an hour after market opens. And then we have a FOMC, which happens at 1 o'clock Central Time. So FOMC, as we know, has a tendency, I just feel like it's coming faster and faster. It seems to always be here. But, what happens with FOMC is that we see the market very slow down quite a bit, usually right before it happens, pops off, and then comes back to normal. Sometimes that FOMC behavior can last 30 minutes. Sometimes it lasts 2 minutes. Sometimes you can't even bat an eye. You bat an eye and you miss it. It's just better to be prepared for when it decides to, or whenever we have the FOMC meetings. So we can just be prepared for the thought process of, hey, this may be crazy, so I'm just going to be in the know, right? So following that, we have some news on Thursday, pre-market, and 30 minutes after market opens. Nothing on Friday. So dare I say it might be a slow week? I don't know. I would never use those words again because it's kind of like restaurant logic when you say, man, it's really slow in here today. And next thing you know, you're so deep in the weeds, you can't even breathe. I know some of you have been there. All right, so let's go ahead and see what the market's doing today. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the daily chart. Here we go. Ooh, okay. I'm just looking at what happened on, wow, this is really interesting. Now, I'm going to close this up a little bit so we can really get a perspective on the high that this market has had in the past. If we're looking at the MACDs, this market, the MACDs have never gone above this area. So we are at a very extreme area. Now, can we go past there? Yeah, I mean, you see these things happen where we get some crazy pullbacks and it goes well beyond where we anticipated. Am I expecting it? Not really at this moment. We don't have a ton of strength, so it could pop back in. One thing that we may see, and that is typical of situations like this where we reach really high areas, is we'll see the MACDs pull back towards the zero line, because remember, these are percentages, these are numbers that can carry on forever. We're going to come back and use those zero lines as areas to really give us bigger anticipations of the move when we get back into these areas and get things back in tune of the price and the MACD is heading in the same direction. Okay, and we can watch the weakness as it's coming down to anticipate it not to continue pushing down and to see the moves up. So that's all stuff that we can use in our arsenal as we're going through this. So this may be something that we see here. Now, in reality, we have not made, yes, we've made a new high past here, but we may see something like a head and shoulders happen to push this back down. We would really want to get back above something like here in order to feel real comfortable and even back above this high that we had back in, December, January. We'd want to get back above here to be like, okay, we're back on the move, we're back on the mend to the upside. Now, as we talked about last week, you can see this little box right here. I'm going to actually move it up a little bit more because this area has moved, right? We see the EMAs pulling up because remember, that EMA is being calculated off of what's happening here, while this EMA is being calculated more over what's happening here, okay? So this one's going to come up a little bit faster, which is pretty cool. It gives us areas to create a bounce. If we see this EMA cross this top Bollinger Band, it'll be a pretty good sign, and we want to see it cross with a little bit of conviction, maybe not just lackadaisy across it. We want to see it really start to roll up. But if we see that EMA cross this EMA and a pull back into it, we may be seeing some things to the upside. But I am going to keep a little bit of caution in there considering where the MACDs are. I mean, we are creating higher pivots here, but there's a thought process that I go through with getting on the opposite side of the EMAs. I want to not just get on the opposite side of them. I want to pull back and exceed that last high without having any kind of divergence happening here. So what I mean by that is we pulled away from the EMAs above it. The MACDs, the EMAs both pulled away above, but we could never get back above that high, and it just pulled right back down to the downside. So to see longevity to the upside, I want to see these price bars pull up here, MACDs agree, and then see some more movement to the upside. So for now, while we still have a strong move up, I'm going to be cautious and I'm going to be curious about what may happen in these areas. And if these MACDs just start smoking to the upside and pull away and create new highs, then that'll be awesome. But it'll be a little hard to catch or to see. We definitely, we'd like to see this pullback. We'd like to see the MACDs come back to familiar areas to give us spaces to create the movement and the trades. And right now we still have a pretty open EMAs to the downside. Even though it's pulling back, they're still pretty open. So there's a lot that could happen here in the distance that we've created from the EMAs to snap back towards them, all kinds of things like that. So just knowing that right now, we're definitely making the shift to the upside on the daily chart. I'm just not sure about the longevity of it. So let's go ahead and go to the next chart, which is the 28,657. Ooh, okay. So I haven't looked at this yet. This is the first look at it. This is a really interesting look, okay? So We pulled up really far away from the EMAs, always anticipating snapping back to them as we did here, saw the strength coming down. As this price was holding out here, the MACDs never got inside, never crossed that bottom Bollinger Band. So we were anticipating the move to the upside to continue there, especially with the openness of the EMAs. Even though we got divergence between these pivots, what that divergence did was just give it enough strength to move it back to the downside at the areas of the EMAs that were strong and open to the upside. And we got to see some signals on our smaller charts to really help us participate in those kind of things, right? And so what happens whenever that happens, it pulls back. We see the same thing happening here, right? And this line I didn't draw here that day. I drew this line weeks ago, right? Months ago, just looking at areas that we had connected with months and months ago. And so it pulls right up to that area and just on a dime stops there, right? And it pulls back, and look at what we see happening in the MACDs. Very, very white, outside of the Bollinger Band though still. And we do still have divergence going on here. So what would be really interesting at this point is to see this pull back maybe towards the EMAs, roll and continue up, and either give us some divergence with some white pivots or something more along the lines of something like this, because it's still got some strength to the upside. Do I expect it to pull back? Yes. Do I expect that pullback to change the entire trend of the market? Not so much yet. I'd really want to see this BB pick up some strength and momentum and show us the reason to cross these bottom Bollinger Bands. So what happens then is I would expect it to pull back up, cross that top Bollinger Band, then give us some divergence. And if this continues down with crossing and breaking outside of the Bollinger Bands, then it tells me that we have some more strength to pull back. Okay, and when I mean pull back, just pull back more and more towards these EMAs, which have obviously picked up the strength to the upside. I mean, this was really a shocker to wake up to and see. I got up the next morning, I'm like, whoa, look at that. I mean, like I said, I'm an optimist and maybe some other people are on board, but we saw this big, strong move to the upside, and wow, that was enough to pull back into the area that held so many times. We broke through these areas, pulled back into them, and just push up, and it's a beautiful thing, right? So let's go ahead and head on over to our, I'm gonna pull this over. I was doing some work on the MES and did a vault video on the MES and just kind of having some fun, showing students that kind of trading can be done the same on the MES that it's been on the ES. So I've been having a little bit of fun with that. All right, so let's look what's happening, and we're going to start on the 10946 and we're going to work our way down. Okay, so we had that big strong move. Now when that big strong move happened, we anticipated some extreme, and you have to anticipate some extreme reach in the MACDs when that kind of thing happens, because it throws everything out of whack. Like, whoa, not expecting that to happen. Nobody does, right? Not anybody in there, just not the normal Joe. Okay. But because of that, it did create some divergence. Now, I have a hard time using this as our divergence level. I may look more right into here and see that, hey, we've pretty much equaled that previous pivot. Are we going to get back above this one? No, we're not going to get back above that pivot. It's going to be just like an unbelievable amount of work. You know what? I say no. That's probably not the right thing to say. Not likely to get back above that pivot, because it's going to take a lot of work. Now, would I maybe see this come back and dance around these areas and maybe even come up here a little bit more? Yeah, that's actually more likely scenario. We've got the strong EMA still opened up here. We've got the MACD trying to break that bottom Bollinger Band, which signifies some strength pulling back to the downside. Well, we may see it pull back into the areas and work its way back up. It's just hard with all this momentum that we've seen to really expect this to come back down. We've seen a lot of movement up and just booking it to the upside. And I don't know why I closed out my 10,946. We'll bring that back. But we've just had a lot of movement up. And so, I mean, just even look at this. If this pulls back right into this area that we held before, it'd be a great space with the EMAs opened up, with strength to the upside. It'd be a great space to pull back in and continue more momentum to the upside. Now, looking at the 1597, we're pulling into our first area that could create a bounce of the EMAs here. Do we expect this EMA to hold? It's a little hard to say. We still see some strength to the downside in the MACDs here. We have crossed over the top Bollinger Band in the 233, but we're still miles to the zero line. We've got EMAs open to the downside. So the immediate has some strength down. We want to remember that there's always going to be an immediate move, and then there's going to be overall moves, right? And we're kind of in the intermittent. We want to be in the middle here, looking for the stuff to happen so that we can participate and feel safe and comfortable. I mean, as safe and comfortable as you can. You get more used to it and feel more safe and comfortable the more you trust yourself in these situations. But, right now it's at a great area for a bounce up on the 1597. But as I said, we're really, really far below the zero line here. We just created some reversal bars that may continue this down. The Bollinger Bands or the BBs are still a little bit of strength out. It looks like they're trying to move still to the upside some. This one is kind of the kicker for me. Even though there's 4,000 ticks left, that's a pretty decent drop. Now, can this pull back together in the next 4,000 ticks and move back up there? Yeah, it can. But if I'm really trying to look at where the last pivot happened on my 10,946, are these pivots and pullbacks? Yes, and they were great areas that you could move your risk and continue up or get in if it pulls back into that area. But the last major kind of pivot areas, I would even maybe say right here, because the way it held out for a little bit, but right in this area. So we have a nice big kind of gap here of where we could pull back to. Would I expect it to stop directly at this EMA? Probably not. I might see it pull back a little bit more. It's the kind of thinness of the EMAs together right now that makes it hard for me to believe that if it pulled back right into here that it would hold it. But it happened here, here, and here. So, there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot going on. I think more than anything, we might see it pull inside kind of like it does here and come back towards this area. But we've got some areas along the way that will hold up the party if, that can hold up the party. And we've got an area above, an area below. Right now, we've still got a little bit of strength to the downside. So like I said, overall is to the upside. But the immediate right now is saying down at an area that could possibly create a bounce. So these are all things that we have to think about when we're looking at the market. You can see that the market has moved up, but if you're not prepared for the pullback and you're not prepared for waiting for the slowdown, you're going to get run over time and time and time again. And it's frustrating. And then there has to be a day where you say, enough is enough. I'm tired of getting my butt handed to me every time. Do I know what I'm looking at? Most people I find do actually understand the direction. It's their execution, like I said, it's the execution and the willingness to learn from mistakes. That's the biggest part. Because you got to look at that and say, okay, what am I not paying attention to? What am I not paying attention to that tells me if I'm going to use the type of risk that I'm using, or if I'm going to not use risk, or if I'm going to use, if I'm going to trade X amount of contracts? What am I not paying attention to that tells me that I need to wait or that it's time to get involved? And those things are a skill to learn, right? And they take time and they take practice and they take self-awareness, because I've said it before and I'll say it a million times. Whatever you are doing in your daily life will show up in your trading. So if you're impatient, if you feel frustrated and angry a lot, if you forget to breathe You know, I mean, like sometimes when we're working out, we forget to breathe, and those are the things that you got to keep. That keeps you. It's a vital, important piece of our living, right? So we have to make sure that we're breathing through these things, and we have to make sure that we're paying attention to the way that we feel, the way that we're thinking, what we're doing. Because if we just think that we're just going to click a button and it's going to work, then you've got a long road in front of you that may not be too fun. But, you know, sometimes those roads are the one that leads you to the best victory, because that hard work, the determination, the never giving up on yourself. And, you know, I try and instill that thought process in all my students when I'm working with them, because I want them to believe that they're good enough to learn this and to understand it. And yes, I believe if I can do it, you can do it, guys. If I can do this, if I can go from a point where I was one day waiting tables and wishing that I was the manager at the restaurant, not that I have any issue with that, but when they told me I would never be allowed to be the manager, I thought, wow, why am I here? I've got to find something that's going to push me further and put me further ahead. And this is what happened. So here I am, you know, still a student every day, and just sharing what I've got and hoping that some people really believe in themselves and find their path along the way. So I'm willing to be there for you guys. So just reach out if you've got questions. We're happy to help. You know, you can reach out, you can check out the beginner guide if you're new to all this, if you're not understanding all this, check out the beginner guide. It's got a lot of great information. So, all right, guys, I am stepping off of that soapbox, and I hope that everybody has a fabulous week. All right. You know, I love you guys being here. Thank you so much. And as always, you know that I look forward to catching you on the profitable side.